It was a calm evening in Nairobi, and the air felt cool after a long hot day. The streets were slowly emptying as people hurried home from work. Amina walked down the narrow path that led to her small apartment. She was tired but peaceful, humming softly as the sun dipped below the buildings. Her shoes made soft sounds on the dusty road, and the smell of roasted corn from a nearby stall drifted through the air. She had no plans that night, just a quiet dinner and maybe a call to her cousin before bed. But her evening was about to take a strange turn. When Amina reached her doorstep, she noticed something she had never seen there before: a small brown box. It sat neatly beside her doormat, clean and perfectly wrapped as if placed with care. She stopped and stared at it for a few seconds. It had no markings except her name and address written in small, tidy letters on top. There was no sender's name. No delivery note. Just the box. For a moment, she thought maybe a neighbor had left it by mistake. She looked around, but the corridor was empty and quiet. The air felt still. She bent down slowly, touched the box, and felt how light it was. It didn't rattle when she lifted it, and it didn't smell strange. The paper was thick and smooth, tied with a thin white string. It looked too neat to be random, too careful to be trash. Amina hesitated, wondering if she should open it right there. Then she laughed softly to herself. Maybe it's from Wanjiru, she said under her breath, thinking of her friend who loved surprising people with small gifts. That thought made her smile, and her worry faded a little. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, placing the box on her table. Her apartment was small but cozy. The evening light came through the window, painting golden lines on the floor. Amina kicked off her shoes, poured herself a cup of water, and sat down in front of the box. She stared at it for a while, her fingers tracing the edge of the wrapping. Something about it was both inviting and mysterious. She picked up her phone and checked her messages. No one had mentioned sending her anything. She called Wanjiru, but her friend didn't answer. Amina shrugged. Maybe it was just a late delivery from something she ordered online. That seemed normal enough. She took a deep breath and pulled the white string loose. It came apart easily, falling like soft thread on the table. She opened the paper, and inside was a small wooden box, smooth and polished with carvings along the edges. The carvings looked like tiny leaves and circles, neat and detailed. It was beautiful. Amina smiled again, feeling curious now. She gently opened the wooden box. Inside was a small bracelet, resting on a piece of white cloth. The bracelet was golden with small red beads shining faintly under the light. It looked handmade but delicate, like something from an old market or maybe an antique shop. She lifted it carefully, admiring how it caught the light. It felt cool against her skin, and she could see her reflection on the smooth surface of the beads. "This is lovely," she whispered. She had always liked jewelry that looked unique. Without thinking much, she slipped it onto her wrist. It fit perfectly, like it had been made just for her. The beads clinked softly when she moved her hand. She smiled again, feeling strangely happy. For a brief moment, she felt a soft chill on her arm, like a cold breeze had touched her. She rubbed her skin and laughed lightly. "I'm imagining things," she said to herself. The evening grew darker outside, and the city lights began to glow through her window. Amina turned on her small lamp, made herself some rice and stew, and tried to relax. But even as she ate, she kept glancing at the bracelet. Something about it caught her attention every few minutes. The red beads seemed brighter under the yellow lamp, and sometimes she thought she saw a faint flicker inside them, like a small spark. But every time she blinked, it was gone. She decided she was probably tired from work and overthinking things. After dinner, she cleaned up and went to sit on her couch. She turned on her favorite radio station, where a calm voice was reading old folk tales. The stories made her feel safe and nostalgic. Her mother used to tell her such tales when she was a child, back in their village. She leaned back, letting the sound fill the room. The bracelet still felt cool on her wrist. Amina tried to remember if she had ever mentioned her address online in public. She couldn't think of any time she had. Maybe it was part of a promotion from a store? Some brands sent gifts to random customers. That seemed possible. She laughed quietly at the thought of winning something without even entering. Still, something in her chest felt unsettled. When she got up to put her dishes away, she noticed her reflection in the window. For a second, it looked like the reflection moved a little slower than she did. She frowned, blinked, and it was normal again. Maybe the glass was just fogged. She brushed it off and went back to her couch. The air felt a little colder now, though all the windows were shut. The bracelet gleamed again under the lamp. She lifted her wrist closer to her face and noticed tiny patterns on the beads, small carvings she hadn't seen before. They looked like letters or symbols but too small to read. Maybe it's from another country, she thought. It was beautiful, yes, but suddenly she wished she knew who had sent it. Her phone buzzed on the table, making her jump. The screen showed an unknown number. She hesitated but didn't answer. A few seconds later it buzzed again, same number. She sighed, picked it up and said, "Hello?" No one replied. She could only hear a soft sound like wind blowing through a hollow tube. Then the line went dead. Amina put the phone down slowly, her heart beating a little faster. She shook her head. Probably a wrong number. Trying to calm herself, she turned off the radio and decided to rest. She went to her bedroom, changed into her nightdress and lay down. The bracelet still sat snugly on her wrist, glinting faintly in the dim light. She thought about taking it off but decided to do it in the morning. The city outside had gone quiet. Only the distant hum of traffic reached her window. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but the cool touch of the bracelet kept reminding her of the box, the neat handwriting, the silence on the phone. Before sleep took her, she whispered softly, "Who sent you?" The room stayed still. The bracelet shimmered once under the moonlight that slipped through the curtains as if answering in silence. And with that quiet mystery resting beside her, Amina drifted off, unaware that her ordinary evening had just turned into something far from normal. Inside the small wooden box was something that caught the light like water on glass. Amina leaned closer and saw a golden beaded bracelet resting on a square of white cloth. Each bead looked smooth and bright, glowing softly under her lamp. She could see her reflection in the surface of the beads. The gold was not harsh or shiny, it had a warm color like the sunset over the hills. The tiny red beads between the gold ones looked almost alive, as if a faint light moved inside them. She lifted it slowly, surprised at how light it was. The bracelet felt cool in her hands and she turned it over, studying the pattern. It looked handmade. The string was strong and firm, and the beads were not perfect circles. Each one had a small difference, giving it a touch of life. Amina had seen many kinds of jewelry before, but this one felt different. It seemed like it belonged to someone with a story. She smiled a little, wondering again who had sent it. She looked at the wrapping paper, but there were still no clues. No tag, no shop name, no signature. Just the box and the bracelet. The mystery made her curious. Amina went to the mirror near her kitchen and held up the bracelet to her wrist. It looked beautiful, like something from another time. She hesitated, then slipped it on. It fit perfectly, not too tight, not too loose. She turned her arm slowly, watching the light dance across it. For a moment she felt a soft chill travel up her arm, like a drop of cold water rolling over her skin. She shivered a little and rubbed her arm. Then she laughed quietly. "You're just tired," she told herself. "It's nothing." The bracelet seemed harmless, just a lovely surprise. She went back to her table and picked up her cup of water. But every time she moved her hand, the bracelet made a faint sound, a soft click, like two beads gently touching. It was almost musical. Amina smiled again. "Maybe it's lucky," she whispered, thinking of how her grandmother used to say some gifts carried blessings. The evening outside had turned dark now. She could hear faint music from a nearby house and the distant sound of traffic. A soft wind moved through the curtains and the air smelled of rain. Amina sat by the window looking at the bracelet again. The beads reflected the small lights of the city, like they were catching tiny stars inside them. She lifted her wrist closer to her face. The red beads looked deeper now, almost glowing from within. For a moment she thought she saw something move inside one of the beads, like a small flicker of light shifting. She blinked, leaned closer, and saw only her own reflection again. "It's just the light," she said softly, though her voice sounded uncertain. She stood and walked around her room, trying to focus on other things. She cleaned up the table, folded her jacket, and checked her phone. Still no messages, no missed calls. No one had claimed to send her a gift. She thought of calling her cousin Malik to ask, but it felt strange to call about something so small. The bracelet still felt cool on her wrist, even though the room was warm. It was like a tiny patch of cold air followed her hand wherever she went. She tried to take it off to check the clasp, but it didn't move easily. The string felt tight, almost as if it had shrunk. She tugged gently, but it didn't slip off. It wasn't painful, just firm. She stopped pulling and sighed. "I'll try again later," she said, shaking her head with a small laugh. She went to the kitchen to make tea. The kettle began to whistle softly, filling the room with steam. She stirred sugar into her cup and watched the steam rise in soft white ribbons. The bracelet caught the steam's reflection and shimmered faintly again. For a second, she thought she saw letters or small shapes appear on the gold beads, tiny marks she hadn't noticed before. They were too small to read, almost invisible unless she tilted her wrist just right. "That's strange," she whispered, frowning a little. but when she blinked, the marks were gone. She took her tea and sat on the couch. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the small wall clock. The more she looked at the bracelet, the more she felt something odd about it. Not fear exactly, just curiosity mixed with a thin line of unease. She couldn't explain it. The gift was beautiful, but it felt like it didn't belong to her. It was as if it carried a small piece of someone else's story. Amina tried to distract herself by scrolling through her phone. She opened social media, laughed at a few posts, and texted her friend Ruth, but even while typing she kept glancing at the golden beads. The way they caught the light made them look alive. Her phone buzzed suddenly and she jumped. The screen lit up with a new message, but it was blank. No name, no text. Just an empty bubble. She stared at it for a long moment. Maybe it was a glitch. She turned off the phone and set it aside. The air in the room felt heavier now. She took a deep breath and stood, deciding to open her window for fresh air. Outside, the sky was filled with clouds, hiding the moon. A soft wind brushed her face and she felt calm again. She looked down at the bracelet and whispered, "You're just a gift. That's all." Saying it out loud made her feel better. She went to her bedroom and placed her teacup on the side table. The clock showed it was almost midnight. She turned off the lights except for the lamp near her bed. The golden bracelet glowed faintly in the dim light. It looked almost peaceful now, resting against her skin. Lying on the bed, she turned her wrist again and again, watching how the colors changed with every small movement. She thought about who might have sent it. Maybe someone from work? Maybe an old friend? The handwriting on the box had been neat, careful. Someone who knew her well, perhaps. She smiled at the idea that someone had thought of her, even if she didn't know who. Her eyelids grew heavy. The wind outside softened, and the sound of distant rain began to fall lightly on the roof. Amina started to drift into sleep. But just before her eyes closed, she felt a faint pulse against her wrist. It was soft, almost like a heartbeat, but not her own. Her breath caught. She opened her eyes and looked at the bracelet. It was still glowing gently, just a warm shimmer. She touched it lightly with her fingers. The coolness was gone now, replaced by a faint warmth that seemed to move. She held her breath and waited, but the feeling faded after a few seconds. She told herself it was just her imagination, that her body heat had warmed the beads. She pulled the blanket over herself and whispered a small prayer before closing her eyes again. The bracelet stayed bright for a few moments longer, the red beads glowing like little sparks before slowly fading back to their calm golden color. The rain outside grew stronger, tapping softly against the window. As Amina fell asleep, her hand rested beside her pillow, the bracelet catching the last bit of lamplight. Everything seemed peaceful again, but in the quiet room, a faint sound came from the wooden box on the table. A soft click, like something shifting inside it. Amina didn't hear it. She was already lost in dreams, her wrist glowing faintly with a golden light that pulsed once, then went still. The bracelet slept with her, shining quietly through the night. That night, the city outside was quiet, and a soft rain fell against the windows. Amina sat in her small living room, finishing the last pages of a book. The golden bracelet still rested on her wrist, shining softly under the lamp. It looked harmless, beautiful even. But for some reason she kept glancing at it more often than before. Something about it felt strange now, though she could not say why. The air in the room seemed cooler than usual, and the shadows looked a little deeper. She tried to ignore the feeling and turned another page of her book. Suddenly the lights flickered. It happened so quickly that she thought it might just be the wind affecting the power. But then it happened again, a soft blink as if the light bulb was struggling. She looked up and frowned. The rest of her apartment was silent except for the soft ticking of her clock. "Not tonight," she murmured, standing up to tap the light switch. The light steadied for a moment, then flickered once more before settling into a dim, yellow glow. Amina sat back down, but the small unease in her chest didn't leave. She turned on her phone to distract herself. The screen came to life, but as she unlocked it, she froze. A message appeared at the top, "Unknown gift." There was no number, no profile picture, just those two words. She blinked, thinking she had read it wrong. The message disappeared almost immediately. She opened her inbox, but it wasn't there. Her fingers trembled a little. Maybe she was just tired. Phones could glitch. She laughed quietly to herself and tried to calm down. But a few seconds later, her phone buzzed again. This time it showed a call. The name flashing on the screen was the same, "Unknown gift." Amina's heart began to beat faster. She didn't move at first. The ringtone echoed through the small room, filling the silence. She slowly reached out and pressed the screen, ending the call. Her fingers felt cold. She locked the phone and set it face down on the table. The lights flickered once more and she heard a faint sound like a whisper, though she couldn't tell where it came from. She looked around the room, her eyes moving to every corner. Everything was in its place, her books, her cup, her jacket on the chair. Nothing seemed wrong, but something felt different. She stood and walked to the mirror near the door. The glass looked foggy even though the air was dry. She rubbed it with her hand, but the blur didn't clear. When she leaned closer, her reflection seemed slightly delayed, as if it moved a fraction of a second after she did. She blinked, stepped back, and her reflection followed, too slowly. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her bracelet. The golden beads shimmered faintly, and for a moment she thought one of the red beads glowed brighter than the rest. She touched it gently and a sharp chill ran through her fingers. She tried to pull the bracelet off, twisting it and tugging at the clasp. It didn't move. The string felt tighter, almost part of her skin. She tried harder, but it refused to come loose. "Come off," she whispered, pulling again. Nothing happened. She exhaled sharply, a small wave of panic rising in her chest. She shook her wrist, but the bracelet stayed still, firm and unmoving. It didn't hurt her, but the pressure felt unnatural, as if it were holding on to her instead of the other way around. The phone on the table buzzed again. She turned to look. The screen glowed bright in the dim room, showing one message: "Do you like your gift?" Amina froze. Her mouth went dry. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone. There was no number, no contact name, only the words on the screen. She stared at them, her heart thumping in her ears. She wanted to reply, but before she could type, the message disappeared. She checked her history. There was nothing there. The sound of rain grew louder outside, tapping hard against the window. The wind whistled through the small gaps near the frame. She felt a strange heaviness in the air, as if the whole room was breathing. She tried to take a deep breath and calm herself. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe this was all just coincidence. She repeated those words in her mind, but even as she did, she didn't believe them. She turned off the lamp, thinking maybe she would just go to bed and forget about it. The room fell into darkness except for the faint glow from the bracelet. The red beads looked brighter now, shining softly like small embers. Amina lifted her wrist close to her eyes. She whispered, "What are you?" The moment she said it, the lights flickered again. The bulb blinked once, twice, then went out completely. The apartment sank into full darkness. The only light came from the bracelet, faint and warm, glowing against her skin. She could hear her own heartbeat. The air felt thick and cold. Amina slowly walked to her bedroom, her steps careful and slow. She felt like someone was watching her, though she knew she was alone. She reached her bed, sat down and pulled her blanket close. She checked her wrist again, trying to calm herself by telling herself it was just light from the window. But the curtains were closed. The glow came from the bracelet itself. Her phone buzzed one last time. She didn't pick it up. She didn't want to. The sound stopped and the silence that followed was deep and heavy. She closed her eyes tightly, hoping sleep would come quickly. But it didn't. Every time she turned, the bracelet brushed against the blanket, making a small sound, a faint tap. It reminded her that it was still there, still cold, still tight. She finally fell asleep after what felt like hours, but her dreams were not peaceful. She dreamed she was standing in the same room the same night, but everything was darker. The bracelet on her wrist glowed so bright that it lit up the walls. She could hear footsteps in the hallway, slow and careful. When she turned toward the sound, she saw a figure standing by the door, tall, still and silent. The figure lifted its arm and a golden light shimmered on its wrist. It was wearing the same bracelet. Amina tried to speak, but no sound came out. The figure didn't move closer, only tilted its head slightly as if watching her. Then its bracelet began to glow brighter until everything around her was white. She woke with a gasp, sitting up quickly. The room was quiet again. Morning light had just begun to enter through the window. She looked down at her wrist. The bracelet was still there, still golden, still perfect. It didn't glow anymore, but it hadn't loosened either. Her phone lay on the floor beside the bed. She picked it up carefully. There were no messages, no missed calls, no history of anything that had happened during the night. It was like the phone had been reset. She stared at the screen for a long time before setting it down. The apartment felt normal again, but Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had changed. The mirrors still seemed dull when she passed them. The lights worked fine now, and yet she couldn't forget the voice she thought she had heard, the message that had vanished, or the glow of the beads that still seemed to hold their secret. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm imagining things." But deep down she knew she wasn't. The bracelet felt heavier now, almost as if it were listening. She got up, opened the curtains and let the morning sun fill the room. The warmth helped her feel calm for a moment. But as she looked down at her wrist, one of the red beads caught the sunlight and shined back at her, bright and steady. The next morning, the sky over Nairobi was covered with gray clouds. Amina woke up feeling weak, her head heavy from a night filled with strange dreams. The golden bracelet was still tight around her wrist, shining faintly in the soft daylight. She sat up and touched it again, hoping maybe, somehow, it would come off. But it didn't move. It felt warm now, almost alive. She frowned and whispered, "What do you want from me?" She walked to the bathroom and tried to slip it off under running water, using soap to make her wrist slippery, but the bracelet didn't move even a little. She tugged harder until her skin turned red. It didn't matter. The golden beads clung to her as if they were part of her skin. Fear slowly crept into her chest. This was not normal. She dried her hands and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The glass was still blurry, just like the night before. Her reflection seemed faint, slightly delayed again, as if something invisible stood between her and the mirror. She stepped back, her breath uneven. Amina knew she couldn't stay in the apartment. She had to find someone who understood things like this. Her grandmother used to talk about people who could sense old things, people who knew when an object carried strange energy. She remembered an antique shop near the old bus station. The man there, an old shopkeeper named Baba Kato, was said to know the history of many things. Maybe he could help. She wrapped a scarf around her arm, covering the bracelet, and left quickly. The streets were still wet from the rain. The air smelled of earth and smoke, and the city was waking up slowly. People hurried by, carrying umbrellas, shouting greetings. Amina walked fast, her heart pounding. Every now and then she felt the bracelet pulse against her wrist, like a faint heartbeat that didn't belong to her. When she reached the old part of town, she saw the small wooden sign that said Kato Antiques. The shop looked quiet, its windows filled with old clocks, necklaces and carved masks. She pushed open the door and a bell rang softly above her head. The air inside smelled of dust, wood and something old, like forgotten time. An elderly man sat behind a wooden counter, cleaning an old lantern with a cloth. His skin was wrinkled and his eyes were sharp and clear. When he looked up, he gave a small, polite smile. "Good morning, my child," he said in a deep voice. "You look troubled. What brings you here?" Amina hesitated, her hands shaking slightly. I need your help, Baba," she said. "Something strange happened. I found a gift and ever since things have not been right." He nodded slowly and motioned for her to come closer. "Show me," he said. Amina pulled off her scarf and held out her wrist. The bracelet caught the shop's light and glowed faintly. The moment the old man saw it, his eyes widened. He stood up so quickly that his chair scraped the floor. "Where did you get this?" he asked sharply, his voice suddenly tense. "I found it at my door," she replied, frightened by his tone. "No name, no note. I thought it was a gift. But it won't come off and strange things have been happening. My lights flicker, my phone shows strange names and my mirrors." She stopped when her voice began to shake. Baba Kato walked slowly around her, studying the bracelet from every angle but careful not to touch it. His face grew pale and he sighed deeply. "Ah, child," he said softly. "You should not have worn it." Amina swallowed hard. "What is it?" He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "That is not just jewelry. It is what we used to call a marking token. Long ago, some people, travelers, traders, and those who dealt in unseen things, used gifts like this to mark others. It is said that the giver leaves a part of themselves inside the gift. When you accept it, you create a bridge between you and them." Amina's hands trembled. "A bridge?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said. "A connection. The kind that cannot be seen but can be felt. Through such a link, the giver can find you, watch you, or even take your energy. Most people no longer believe in such stories, but objects hold memory, and some hold more than that." She took a step back, her heart beating faster. "So you mean, someone sent this to me on purpose?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe it was left behind by someone else and it found you. Such things do not come by accident." Amina stared at the bracelet. The gold beads looked innocent in the soft shop light, but now they seemed darker somehow. "Can you take it off?" she asked, her voice desperate. "Please, Baba, I just want it gone." The old man hesitated. "If I try to remove it by force, it may harm you," he said. "It has chosen you for now. But there are ways to break its link." He walked to a shelf and pulled down a small clay bowl and a pouch filled with crushed herbs. "First," he said, "you must know this. Never accept a gift from someone you do not know. And never keep what you do not understand. Gifts are not always blessings. He poured the herbs into the bowl, their smell sharp and bitter. These will cleanse the air around you, he said, lighting the herbs with a match. Thin smoke rose, curling in the dim shop. You must return the bracelet to where it came from. Take it back to the doorstep where you found it. Leave it there before the next sunrise. Do not look back. Do not speak to anyone while you do it. Amina watched the smoke twist and fade. Her hands felt cold. And if I don't? She whispered. The old man's eyes grew sad. Then it may stay with you forever, he said quietly. It may not hurt you at first, but over time, such objects drain a person's peace. You will feel watched, restless, never alone. These things feed on attention. Amina felt tears sting her eyes. I didn't know, she said. I thought it was something beautiful. He gave her a kind look. That is how they always appear, he said. Beautiful things draw us close, but beauty without truth can be dangerous. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small charm made of woven grass and beads. He handed it to her. Keep this with you until the bracelet is gone. It will protect you from the energy around it. And remember, once you leave it behind, do not touch it again. No matter what you see or hear. Amina nodded slowly, clutching the charm in her free hand. The smoke in the room made her eyes water, but the air felt lighter now. Thank you, Baba, she said softly. I'll do as you say. The old man gave her one last warning. Be careful, child, he said. Sometimes the giver follows the gift. If you see anyone you do not know near your home tonight, do not speak. Just walk away. Amina left the shop quietly, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. The rain had stopped, but the clouds were still heavy. She walked home fast, holding the charm tightly in her hand. The bracelet felt heavier than before, as if it knew what she was planning. When she reached her building, she stopped by the gate and looked up at her window. Everything was quiet. She could almost believe nothing had happened. But deep inside she could feel it. The faint pulse of the bracelet, steady and alive, like something breathing against her skin. She whispered to herself, Tonight you're leaving me. And as she walked through the gate, the golden beads shimmered faintly, catching the last light of the gray sky, as if they understood exactly what she meant. That night, the streets of Nairobi were quiet, with only a few cars passing by and the sound of dogs barking in the distance. The sky was dark and clouds covered the moon, leaving the city in a soft, heavy silence. Amina stood by her window, staring at the bracelet on her wrist. The golden beads looked calm, almost innocent, as if nothing strange had ever happened. But she knew better. She could still remember the flickering lights, the blurred mirrors, and the strange messages that had appeared on her phone. Every time she looked at the bracelet, her heart filled with fear. She thought about the old shopkeeper's words all day. His voice still echoed in her mind, You must return it before sunrise. Leave it where you found it and do not look back. The thought of doing that frightened her, but she also knew she couldn't keep it. The bracelet didn't belong to her. Whatever power it carried needed to be left behind. She could not live with it any longer. Amina took a deep breath and wrapped the bracelet with a small piece of cloth. The moment the fabric touched it, she felt a strange pulse, faint but real, like the bracelet was alive and resisting her. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to continue. She placed the wrapped bracelet inside a small paper bag and tied it shut with string. Then she put on her coat and scarf, grabbed the small grass charm that the old man had given her, and stepped outside. The air outside was cold and the streets were empty. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and her shoes made soft splashes as she walked. Streetlights glowed faintly through the mist. Every step she took felt heavy, like something invisible was watching her. She didn't look back, just as the shopkeeper had warned. She walked past familiar corners and small shops, their shutters closed for the night. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke from distant fires. A cat darted across the road, making her jump, but she kept walking, holding the small bag tightly in her hand. The charm around her neck felt warm against her skin, as if it was protecting her. When she reached the empty roadside near her building, the same spot where she had first found the box, she stopped. The street was silent, and the only sound was the faint hum of a faraway car. She looked around carefully. No one was there. Her hands trembled as she bent down and placed the bag on the ground. For a moment she hesitated. A voice in her mind whispered that she should take one last look at the bracelet, just to be sure it was still inside. But she remembered the old man's warning. Do not look back. Do not touch it again. Her heart pounded as she stood up. Goodbye, she whispered softly. Then she turned and walked away. Every few steps she fought the urge to turn around. It felt as if something behind her was calling her name in the faintest voice, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. But she didn't stop. She kept walking until she reached her building, breathing hard, her hands cold and sweaty. She ran up the stairs and closed her door, locking it quickly. Inside, her apartment felt different. The air was still but lighter somehow. The lights didn't flicker anymore. The mirrors looked normal, clear and calm. She stared at her wrist. It was bare for the first time in days. A faint red mark circled the skin where the bracelet had been. She rubbed it gently, feeling both relief and exhaustion. Amina sat on her couch, holding the charm in her hand. "It's over," she whispered to herself. She stayed awake for a long time, afraid to sleep, afraid that the bracelet might appear again. But nothing happened. The night passed quietly. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the window, warm and golden. She felt peace for the first time in days. The air smelled fresh and birds chirped outside. Amina smiled weakly and decided to go out to check the roadside. She dressed quickly, slipped on her sandals and stepped outside. The morning streets were busy again, full of people heading to work and school. Children laughed as they ran past her. The world felt normal again. She walked to the same spot where she had left the bracelet. Her heart beat faster as she approached. When she reached it, she stopped. The small paper bag was gone. There was no sign of it, not even a piece of string left behind. The ground was empty, clean, as if nothing had ever been there. She looked around, half expecting to see someone holding the bracelet, but everyone was just going about their morning. Amina stood there for a while, staring at the empty space. Then she smiled, a small, tired smile, and whispered, "Thank you, Baba Kato." As she walked back home, she felt light, almost new. The strange coldness that had followed her for days was gone. Even her reflection in the window now looked bright and normal again. She could finally breathe without fear. Days turned into weeks and life returned to normal. Amina went back to work, met friends for coffee and laughed again. But deep inside she knew she had changed. She had learned something she would never forget. One afternoon, as she sat outside a cafe sipping tea, a young man approached her with a friendly smile. He carried a small basket filled with handmade bracelets. "Hello, madam," he said politely. "Would you like to buy one? They are lucky charms, very special." Amina looked at the bracelets. They were colorful and beautiful, glimmering under the sun. For a moment, she felt the old curiosity stir in her chest, the same feeling she had when she first saw the golden bracelet on her doorstep. But then she remembered the fear, the sleepless nights, the flickering lights, and the whisper that had haunted her. She smiled kindly and shook her head. "No, thank you," she said softly. The man nodded and moved on, selling his bracelets to other passers-by. Amina watched him go, still smiling to herself. She turned her gaze toward the sky. The clouds were soft and white, and the sunlight felt gentle on her skin. She thought about how easily one small mistake had changed her life for days, and how lucky she was to escape it. That evening she visited Baba Kato again to thank him. The old man smiled when he saw her. "You returned it," he said simply, as if he already knew. "Yes," Amina replied. "And it's gone now." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Then the bond is broken. Remember, my child, not every gift is a blessing. Some are doors that should never be opened." Amina smiled softly and bowed her head. "I understand now," she said. "I'll be careful." He handed her a small piece of folded paper. "Keep this," he said. "It's a simple prayer for protection. Read it when you feel unsure." She thanked him and left the shop. The city lights began to glow as the sun disappeared behind the buildings. For the first time she walked home without fear. She no longer felt watched or followed. Her heart was calm. That night she cooked dinner, turned on her favorite music and sat by the window. The world looked peaceful again. The memory of the golden bracelet still lived in her mind, but it no longer frightened her. Instead, it reminded her of something important, that not every beautiful thing is meant for us. Now, whenever someone offered her a gift without reason, she remembered the cold glow of the beads and the whisper that followed her through the dark streets. She would smile politely, shake her head and say in her gentle voice, "No, thank you." And in that small, simple answer, Amina found her peace.